Hello everybody, today I'm going to look at comparative approaches. This is a key element of A-level politics component 3, where you have to compare, in the case of the unit we do, we have to compare the United States against the UK. And you have to bring in these different comparative approaches when doing so. And I'm going to talk a bit about this and how you use it and some of the details about the different approaches. So they are theoretical approaches to comparing the US and the UK system, and there are three of them. There is rational, cultural and structural, and we're going to look at all three of those today in a bit more detail and how they might be useful and why you might use them in looking at different elements depending on the question that you're asked. Now, you must use them in question 2, which is a 12-mark question. I've got an example of the one from 2019 from edXL on the screen here. So, analyse the different legislative powers of the UK and US Congress. In your answer, you must consider the relevance of at least one comparative theory. And that kind of, the second part of that, in your answer, you must consider the relevance of at least one comparative theory. That is always there on question 2, and question 2 is compulsory, so you have to do it. And so one of the things you will need to do very quickly when looking at a question 2 is decide which one of these three structures, which one of these approaches you're going to use, the structural one, the cultural one, or the rational one. And it'll depend on what it's asking. And then it's also really useful when you're doing your question 1, where again it's a 12-mark question. We have to examine similarities and or differences on a particular aspect of politics between the US and the UK. And again, these ideas might be something that will inform the way that you would answer that. So it is a key part in the exam, and it also is a really helpful way of thinking about politics when you are doing this comparative unit. And you might not only use it when you're studying, you might also use it when you're just watching the news and you're looking at information about political systems or political events in other countries, and to think how these different elements or these different approaches affect what's happening. So the first one I'm going to talk about is rational, and now this focuses on individuals. So it focuses on presidents, prime ministers, members of Congress or members of Parliament, voters. Now it assumes that individuals act rationally out of self-interest, aiming for the best outcome for themselves. You might immediately ask the question here, does everybody act rationally? And there may well be several politicians you can think of immediately that you think, I'm not sure they're rational. Individuals, according to this theory, have political goals and will seek to achieve them. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That a politician would have an end goal of what they want to do and will set about doing the best that they can to achieve that. I mean, there is a lot of bits that we'll look at some of the other elements that might get in the way. So the structural stuff might get in the way. So a president might want to do something. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can. So for example, they might want to build a wall, for example, but they might not be able to get Congress to agree to give them any money to do it. Culture might get in the way. So for example, when Obama was president, he wanted to bring in stricter gun controls, but the American culture, in terms of its history and the way that it thinks about guns, meant that was a very difficult thing to do. So it's not always going to be perfect, this rational model, but a lot of it makes sense in terms of individuals having goals and wanting to achieve them. Now, so it's useful when comparing prime ministers and presidents. They both use their powers to achieve policy aims. They both set policy agenda in the country, and they both have the power to make key appointments of other decision makers. So it's particularly useful if you're comparing kind of conviction or charismatic leaders who may not stick to the normal structures or fit with the particular culture of their party. I mean, I think here particularly of Trump as a really good example of this, and Johnson, I think, might well fit into this mold as well. You kind of go, well, what is it that they're trying to achieve, and how are they trying to do it, and because of them being slightly out of the norm, then maybe they don't stick to the cultures, and maybe they don't stick to the structures as has been done by more conventional prime ministers and more conventional presidents. It's useful when looking at members of Congress and members of Parliament who, for example, resist party discipline or the influences and offers of patronage from the executive. it can be useful in explaining how people choose to vote, but then again, you might not always think that people make rational choices on that either. So, for example, you might suggest that rational choice would suggest that less well-off poor voters are likely to vote Labour in the UK and Democrat in the US because of the policies that those parties put in place and how they would benefit the less well-off. And then you might look at an election of a kind of radically right-wing Republican president and an old Etonian in the UK and think, right, okay, so maybe this isn't the rational choice bit, then doesn't work. So it's a good theory to use, and it's particularly focused on individuals and individuals trying to achieve their aims by whatever means they can. The structural model focuses on structures, unsurprisingly, and it's probably the most used methods by political scientists. It concentrates on constitutions, electoral processes, legislative processes, the location of power and sovereignty, both at national and state or local level, devolution, things like that. So, again, as someone who loves politics and loves constitutions and systems and things like I do, this is a natural one that I'm drawn towards, because it looks at the big picture, and you look at how the system works, and then you either get very excited by how it interacts and balances and checks and systems like that, or you get very frustrated because you kind of go, well, this system doesn't work, it's not giving the result that it should give. And so, for example, if you hear me rant on first past the post system, that might be something like that, where I go, the problem here is the structure. It's not how people are voting is the problem, it's the way that it's calculated. We might well get this when we look at electoral colleges in America, and we look at presidential outcomes in presidential elections. So it focuses on the powers granted to institutions and individuals by the Constitution, and that individuals and groups are constrained by the structures that they work in. Differences therefore occur between the US and UK system, and they turn out to be very different systems because the structures they are based on are very different. So this is useful when comparing prime ministers and presidents, as it can explain comparative powers and the way that they have to act. For example, Trump and Obama's agendas were both kind of really frustrated by the Congresses that they were elected alongside. Well, that's unlikely to be a similarity that you'll see with Johnson, who has a strong majority, because of the structure of the UK system with the executive and the legislature all in together. He's unlikely to face major difficulties in Parliament. However, both the President and the Prime Minister face problems, constraints by courts. So, for example, Johnson on the prorogation of Parliament, Trump on well, a whole variety of elements. I mean, one I've chosen here is when he tried to ban people from majority Muslim countries coming into the US, which was immediately challenged through the courts. It's also useful when comparing the powers of members of Parliament and Congress and them being able to act as they might want. Because you might say, well, if you look at rational choice, would you expect to see the same level of kind of voting against the party in the US and the UK? Now, it's far more likely in the US because there isn't the structures there to hold people in line that there is in the UK. The final version is cultural, and this focuses on groups. So it might be political parties or pressure groups or factions within either of those, or voter groups, or again, you might look at national or regional culture and how that affects the way people act and the way people vote and the way people make decisions. So it looks at how groups influence politics, and individuals, it suggests, act in the way that they do because of the group that they are part of, and that they're in a group that has shared values and beliefs, and members tend to then conform to those beliefs and ideas that are held. And there is a possibility immediately this is slightly flawed. I mean, the UK and then in particular the US are very complicated societies. They contain many different cultures, and individuals may belong to multiple different groups, and therefore you might look at it and go, well, that group, they're not a united group, because somebody might be in that group but also in that group, and it causes difficulty. So for example, you might look at the Democrats. Well, the Democrats are a group, so all Democrats think like this. Well, actually, a Democrat from the Deep South is going to be very different to a Democrat from the Northeast Coast, or a Democrat from California. Similar to the Republicans. Then you might look at particular issues that are going to be viewed differently in cities and in the countryside. In the UK, you might have issues that are viewed differently in London than how they're viewed in the north, but not necessarily universally. The influence of culture can be really, really powerful. So, for example, one of the things that when we keep an example I commonly use is one that my students tend to come back to is the US and guns, and they kind of go, well, we just don't get it. My daughter showed me a TikTok the other day with a kind of an Australian comedian who was going on about how there was a terrible massacre in Australia, and then after that they banned guns and there weren't any more massacres, and he's going, and the US is different, I don't understand. Well, part of the reason for it is a cultural thing, it's a historical thing in the US, which means that the views on it are different to how the views are in the UK or in other countries. And then it's going to be really useful because a prime minister or president might act in a particular way to fit in with a culture of their party or a faction or a key pressure group. So Johnson, for example, famously wrote both a pro-European article and an anti-European article, and he decided he liked the anti one better, and so went kind of really big on Brexit. But it seems to a lot of people looking at it, this is that he's jumped that way because that is the culture of his party, and therefore if he wanted to be leader, which he did, then he had to go in that direction. Trump is accused of this in a variety of different ways. He seems to have taken on the kind of the ideas of evangelical Christianity and ideas on abortion and things like that, which don't necessarily seem to fit with things that he said in the past, or necessarily in the way that he's lived, and therefore people kind of look at it and go, well, that's just him adopting what he thinks his party want him to do, rather than something that is a genuine conviction. And we can also see the focus on groups and culture being really important. When we get kind of really tribal politics, we see a huge amount of this in the UK. It's becoming more and more the case in the US as well. And it can be really damaging to bipartisan approaches where parties need to work together. Now, they don't necessarily have to work together a huge amount in the UK, but they do in the US. And we will talk about various groups within society and different political groups and pressure groups and all kinds of different things. And all of those can affect the culture of the nation. And again, you'll get regionalism and you'll get all kinds of different things. Now, it's very difficult, I think, sometimes when verging on the cultural approach to avoid some fairly gross generalizations, and that's the one to be careful of with this particular version. Right, I hope that's been useful, because this is something that people come back to as you go through the course, and you'll have to keep coming back to these different comparative theories. So really, really important for question 2. And when you look at the different bits of US politics, you'll then go back and you'll revise and you'll look at some of the UK bits and you'll compare them, getting ready for question 1 and question 2 on the paper, and then also helping you get ready for units 1 and 2. And these comparative theories are there to aid you and help you, where you can think, well, what are we looking at here? If I look at this from a cultural point of view, if I look at it therefore focusing on groups, or do I look at an individual group focusing on rational choice and what individuals will do, or do I look at it in a structural point of view, and do I look at the way that the systems are built and the constraints that this causes? Again, I hope this has been useful. Please if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to my channel. There's going to be a lot more videos following on through the rest of the year, looking at US politics and also UK politics, as I try and build a huge playlist covering the whole of A-level politics. Again, any comments, anything you want to share with me or want to ask me, then please do that as well. Thank you very much for watching.